Welcome. Welcome, everybody. No mai, haere mai, welcome. My name's Brendan Hoare from Pure New Zealand, working closely with Organics Aotearoa New Zealand. It's a great pleasure to have you here today with this webinar with Todd Muller. And I'll also introduce Lou Vissant, who's OANZ's #1 looker after of all things behind the scenes and communications. And Lou will be sort of managing and also looking after some of the Q&A. So a few rules before we hook into it. All questions, please, in the Q&A. That's at the bottom of the screen. And if you can put your questions in there, Lou and I will sort of frame those and get those directly to Todd. And then there's also the chat. If you want to send through links or make a commentary also to each other, you're very welcome to do that. Great. So look, Todd Muller, welcome. Thank you very much for today and coming here and having a chat with us. And yeah, for everybody, Todd has a commercial background in both Fonterra and Zespri in the primary sector. Those are some of our engine rooms which drive the country. But of course, we also know Todd as an MP for 9 years, just over 9 years, and a leader of the National Party. So thank you very much for coming here today, Todd. Perhaps you just want to kick off with a bit of an introduction of yourself also, and what you're up to now.
Kia ora, Brendan, and morena, everybody. Look, it's great to be here and have a chat with you, Brendan, about the whys and wherefores of Select Committee submissions and what works and perhaps what doesn't. But look, thank you. I have rather firmly sort of turned my back on New Zealand politics because my first love is US politics. And so if I thought I got myself into trouble in New Zealand politics, you dive into US politics, it's possibly even worse. But look, I do a weekly podcast with a colleague of mine, Elizabeth Soul. It's called What's the Story, Old Glory? And we get Americans on every week and really try and ask them to explain what the hell's going on. Look, American politics, like I say, has been a passion, and I look at what's going on in America with great concern, actually. I find the speed in which Trump is upending our traditional norms and institutions are very troubling. But it'll find its way down to the bottom of the world, and it's interesting to hear the Americans' perspective living there right now from both sides of the political divide. So that's what I do. For a chunk of my job, I sit on a couple of boards. I also do a little bit of lecturing at University of Waikato when they have visiting delegations come over from different countries to try and explain New Zealand politics.
Cool, thank you. Now, US politics does affect our politics, doesn't it? That might be a nice segue across. How does that happen?
Well, I think, the nature of the interconnected world we live in, both in terms of trade and communication, means that every utterance of Trump has a life-size impact on us and other people around the globe. And he has hit the ground running, I guess you could put it that way. And it seems to be just a 24/7, 24-hour, 7-day-a-week machine at the moment. That he seems far more determined to change politics and post-war traditional approach to politics than he was in the first term.
Great. So let's go into the actual why we're here today. And I think that's quite a nice little segue across because we have the Gene Tech bill in front of us.
Yep.
And as we just had a chat before we came live, it's been alive and kicking in New Zealand for well over 25 years as a topic, and it's been actually an election issue. We all know about Corngate in the past, and here it is in front of us right now, and submissions are due on Monday the 17th. And Lou, you might want to put a prompt in the chat about getting people, if they aren't sure about that, to go to that. So just take us initially, Todd, through why submissions are important in democracy and the process that we're in.
Oh, look, fundamentally, they're critical. I know there'll be people listening going, what's the point? But with very few exceptions, legislation that gets introduced in the House, when it goes to a select committee, when it comes back from that select committee, there will be changes. Even bills that you fundamentally disagree with, and I appreciate this is one of them for this audience, there will be changes that will be made by that select committee. And so you have an opportunity, and it's a very accessible opportunity in this country. It's much easier, in my view, to have your say, to connect with the select committee and have what you have written taken on board than in other jurisdictions. So I fundamentally disagree with the view that it is pointless. It will make some change. Will it make the change that you want? Will it make the change that you want at the scale that you expect? Maybe not, but some change will be made, and that change will be driven by the effectiveness of the submissions that the select committee receive.
So effectiveness, that's a good word. So how do we make our submissions more effective?
Well, I think there's probably two or three comments I'd like to make here. Is that most of the time the submissions have the form of, firstly, do I as an individual or as a group, do we support the broad intent of the bill, yes or no? And so that is always sort of a critical section. Do you think that what the government is trying to do here with its intent, broadly, the right thing to be doing from a public policy perspective? And that requires, you need to hold a view on that and explain with real community examples as to why you think this is the case. Then you drop down to the proposed legislation itself, because you've got to see it through the lens of how this works. A minister or a government comes in with an intent. That's your explanation in the bill, the policy statement, and then it goes to Parliamentary Council Office, those who draft it, the lawyers of Parliament, if you like, and they then draft a bill that tries to give effect to it. So that second point, where you actually look at what's written in the bill and decide, are all these clauses bad? Are all these clauses good? Almost certainly it's in the middle. What can be improved? What do you think could be changed? And this is the area where you don't, in my opinion, you don't want to get drawn into saying, I think this bill is crap. I think it should be chucked out. There's nothing here that I would change because it's all wrong. Because whilst that will be accepted by the select committee and your 5 minutes of speaking to them will count, I don't think it has effect. If you disagree with the purpose, you need to explain why, what's at risk, and then you drop down to the specific clauses. And I would hope that there are some clauses in this bill that you think actually the intent is broadly fine, and perhaps with a bit of additional wording could be made stronger or more effective. And then there may be clauses that you're very strongly against, and you would also put suggestions forward as to what could be done to protect your interests or your industry through changing that. That's the really key thing. The things that don't get traction in a select committee are people that say, this is all nonsense, it should be chucked out. And frankly, equally, this is fantastic. We really love this, but there's no analysis behind it, right? That will just it will be received. It's of interest in as much it's a number on a paper. We've received another 2 more, but the select committee and the drafters and the officials won't take any mind of it. It's those that get, frankly, into the weeds and explain to the committee why the legislation as it is currently worded is not going to work for their community, their business. And you've got to be quite explicit there. Don't assume that the MPs sitting around the table have any knowledge of this. Of course, they're not dumb. I'm not suggesting that. They're impressive individuals, but they are most likely generalists. You might have 1 or 2 with a health background. If you take the chair, for example, Sam Uffindall from Tauranga, he's had no exposure to health in his time prior to becoming an MP. This is quite typical. So I just saw someone make a comment, too many generalists. That indeed is the case. Often you find MPs that are generalists. Now, you can't change that. That's what you've got. So if you've got generalist MPs who are in a health committee dealing with a bill that has potentially major impacts for the agribusiness side of the New Zealand economy, you have to approach it through the lens of explaining that in reasonably clear and blunt terms why you believe this is a step in the wrong direction.
Now, Todd, cool. That was great. I think that was a great summary in terms of the effectiveness. But what we don't want to turn people off, and if you could just give us a bit of a handle on this, is not everyone's a lawyer. Clause, like how it's structured. Tell us about what the language to use in terms of, I mean, if I was a grower or if I was a trader, I use my language, right? I just explain what I'd like in lay terms. And I'll come back to the drafters second, but talk us through about the language and how I actually express myself clearly in writing.
Well, I think the key thing is that you have to express yourself and your own lived experience and what you know to be true. That is the absolute most powerful point. You don't need to be a lawyer. If you see a set of clauses in this bill that you believe and your team believe are a challenge to how you do business and therefore the wider community, you need to explain that in your terminology, right? I'm not suggesting that you need to come up with suggested replacement language clauses. It will be very powerful if in your broader community you have people who can do that, but in your specific individual submission, you don't need to do that. You just need to identify how it is currently written will impact me and my business and my community in this way. And it may be that other parts of the bill you think are reasonably healthy, work. I mean, there's a reason why it's gone to the Health Select Committee, right? It's because most New Zealanders look at gene technology through the lens of, well, firstly, they don't understand it. And then secondly, if something comes along that could assist me in terms of my own health journey, I'm probably going to be quite keen for that to be available to me, right? And so as distinct from the other areas of challenge and risk of a more open model to the New Zealand agribusiness economy. So you have to therefore put that forward in that context.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for that. Now, can you just give us a bit of an insight? You were talking about drafters. So there's MPs listening, but then there's also people taking note. What happens behind the scene of what actually happens and the role of drafters, people who actually draft legislation? Can you give us a little insight into their world?
Right. So there are always lots of people. This is why it's so much better doing submissions online, orally through the Zoom, which is now, as you all know, totally available. And I encourage you all to take that opportunity up. And I'll talk about how best to do that shortly. But the people in the room, for those of you who are going to turn up physically in Wellington, you have the MPs seated in a semicircle, and then beside them, sitting on the walls, but on the outside of the walls are officials, and those officials reflect the ministries that are the ministry that is in charge of this bill. So there will be health officials sitting in there. Now, I would assume that the government will probably put some agri officials in there too, because of the clear crossover and the scope of this bill in terms of the impact on different communities and sectors. And then the drafters work for PCO, Parliamentary Council Office. Now they've done the first draft, if you like. That's what's being debated, and they take notes at the suggestions that come through from people around how things could be improved. But ultimately, it is the decision of the committee, the MPs, taking advice from the officials who work for the minister, who give direction to the PCO as to what to change and what not to change. So this makes the power of the submission really important. Your ability to connect with those MPs as individuals and then as a collection sitting around that table to explain in your own language, powerful language, as to why parts of this bill work and why parts of this bill do not work. That's where the connection happens.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Now, just going to pause for a second because I see no questions in the Q&A. I see lots in the chat, none in the Q&A. We're only going to take questions in the Q&A, which is at the bottom of the screen with the letters Q and A in it and a big question mark. So please put them in there, everybody. So yeah, Todd, we are openly taking delegations to Wellington. We've done so with science and select and presented to the select committee, the primary production select committee, but we've also been working with MB, MPI, MFAT, MFE, health. I think this bill will have an impact on over 10 acts. It's quite complicated.
Yes.
From the RMA through to biosecurity. How do we cut through all of that complexity? Is there a sort of a summary you could give out, and then we'll move on to actually presenting at the select committee?
Yeah, well, I mean, that is complicated, right? And the lawyers amongst, and I wasn't a lawyer, I was one of those renowned generalists that I saw people make comments about before. You really take the advice, as an MP sitting in that room, you take the documents that have been provided, which are fully available on the parliamentary website too, which is, the departmental reports, the regulatory impact statements. Essentially, it is the summary of the officials' thinking about why this is necessary, the impact it is going to have on the whole economy. And that document is worth reading. But unless you're Marcus Wilkins and people like him doing good work, trying to pour through all the line-by-line implications, I wouldn't go through the process of trying to match up the 10 different acts that this bill would make changes to if it passes. I would focus on the broader picture. What is the broad intent of the bill? There are particular clauses that I am not happy with, that I think the risk is higher than the benefit. Explain why you think that. And no doubt your team will be able to provide you with suggestions of what perhaps could be in its place. But the power of your own lived experience has a disproportionate impact in select committee. I have sat in select committees. I was one where we were debating technical issues relating to fisheries quota. And frankly, the power of individual vessel owners talking about what this would mean in practice really did have an impact, and saw us make some changes that otherwise, frankly, we wouldn't have made. And the committee pushed back, if you like, back to the officials, back to the minister, saying, you know what, I don't think we've got this quite right.
Yeah, thank you, Todd, because New Zealand's small enough for people to relate to that, right?
They are, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important one for those listening and engaged today, to have that as that personal lived experience and really expressing that as clearly as possible. We have a question here, Todd. So Susan is a certified organic dairy farmer, and she's asking, do the same officials read all the submissions, and do they have a structured process?
Yes, they do. Great question. Yes, they do. And then they do a report for MPs, which become in time a public report that lists all the submissions. You have a document which says, here's all the submissions. Here are the substantive points, and these go to pretty granular. These are not high level. They are essentially clause by clause analysis of all the submissions, who supported, who did not, what were the suggested changes, right? And so all of that's there, and they are required by the select committee to give us advice as to whether we should accept the changed as outlined or not accept it. Okay, now that of course partly sees an interconnection between the policy intent of the government and then how the legislation is drafted, and should there be change. So I don't want to, the fact is that this is a government bill. It is likely to pass in some form, right? The nature of government being the fact that there's a three-party makes it, frankly, more open to change, in my view, than just a single government like that 17 to 20 to 23 Labor government, when it was just Labor, it was a bit harder because it was talked back to the old FPP model. When you've got three parties in government and all parties sitting around that health committee, there is opportunity for perhaps more movement on this than would otherwise be the case.
Right. Okay. I've submitted. I've licked my envelope. It's in the mail. It's gone. I get called up. I can talk. I can talk to my submission. I get chosen. I'm one of the chosen ones. What are some do's and don'ts of actual and oral presentation, Todd?
Well, firstly, congratulations for being one of the 6 that will lick an envelope. The rest of us will email it in. Look, if you get chosen to be there, a couple of key points. Individuals get 5 minutes, organizations 10 to 15. 5 minutes is not long, right? So what you do is you go through, you get online earlier and listen to the conversation, right? This is a great thing in this country. All of this is public. So you can sit online and just listen to the conversation the previous 2 or 3 hours if necessary, or the day if you're first up the next day, and get a flavor of it. And what you'll see and hear are people that give 5-minute submissions that are totally supportive of the bill, and then you'll see others that are perhaps more like you, maybe from your organization, who are giving 5-minute comments, and you'll hear whether there are any questions or not. And what tends to happen is initially there are all sorts of questions, right? And then over time, as the sort of nature of the debate distills into the various camps, people tend to repeat the same concerns. You'll find the questions get less and less. So part of this is working out, are you at the front of it or are you at the back of it, to prepare for questions? And then secondly, after you've listened to that, think, right, I've got 5 minutes. I say who I am. I say that my submission, they will say your submission has been read. What would you like to add to it? And this is when you do a little bit of prep and you think, okay, I've listened yesterday. I've heard a number of our team make these points, and some of the questions I think didn't quite get to the issue.
Yep.
You can say, I would like to address a couple of issues that are in my submission or are related to my submission, and you just go bang, 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 and you stop after 3 minutes, 2 minutes, probably after 4 minutes, sorry, and see if there's any questions.
Right.
Don't be offended if there isn't. It doesn't mean that no one's listening. It means that more than likely your submission is very similar to ones that have gone before. But I cannot emphasize this strongly enough. I would just simply focus on 2 or 3 key things, informed by what you've been listening to, how perhaps your fellow growers have got on in the Q&A and their submissions, what you think really needs to change, and you put it in your own words. What it's going to mean for my community, what it could mean for the people I employ, that's what you say.
Yeah. Awesome. Now we've got some questions coming in, Todd. One again, Susan, I'll come to you second because you've had a question. I'm going to go to Tracy, who's, yeah, I mean, this is, she's just calling the bill's a word salad. It's how do I get it right? Because if I misinterpret the wording because it's so ambiguous and I don't speak correctly, so there's a bit of apprehension there, Todd. Not everyone reads law, right?
Oh, and neither did I, and I found that, and so that question that, Tracy, your question is bang on. If there is something that you're reading that is ambiguous, say that it is ambiguous. Remember, we're not the drafters. Some of us, and some of your submission, you might be able to lean on other organizations to get suggestions of what could replace it. But there is nothing wrong with saying, when I read this section, I found it too ambiguous. And I would have thought that something of this importance would have clearer protections for New Zealand. For example, I'm just giving you an example of how to do it. That is a perfectly valid thing to say, okay? Often people get, and understandably so, quite nervous about the engagement. But the power sits with you. I know ultimately the power sits with government, and a lot of people listening will roll their eyes and think, yeah, but they'll just do what they want anyway. I hear that, but there will be changes. And actually, you are the public that have been asked, and in our way of operating here in New Zealand, we require that feedback to make sure we've got it right. So Tracy, your question saying, or your submission where you say, actually, this section is too ambiguous, I don't think it works.
Yeah.
Perfectly valid contribution to the debate.
Great. And Susan's back with what should you do to be chosen to present at your submission?
Yeah, look, I'm not sure about that because you've got to ask to give an oral submission, but if there are thousands that ask to be heard, and you will only have a certain amount of time, normally it's a 6-month reporting back from the moment it gets introduced to when they have to have the final report of the committee back after all the submissions. So it's been quite a while since I've been in a place where we denied people the oral submissions. Like, for example, that fisheries bill, any person who wanted to get involved and give an oral submission could, because it was relatively niche, if I could use that word. And so you had sort of hundreds of submissions and 70 oral submitters, so you could make it work. But if you've got thousands and thousands, which you're going to have in this context, I don't know the criteria in which they choose the oral submitters, but you absolutely have to ask. It may well be a random type thing, because organisations that there will be they will do a spread of those organisations to make sure they're heard. But the orals, maybe they'll do a spread. They will look at the submissions. Normally, they do a mix of for and against to have it broadly even. But apart from that, don't know how you can be assured that your name gets pulled out of the hat. Okay. Because the MPs, by the way, do not do this process.
Yeah. It's the officials that do this,
the
right?
Officials do this process. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you for making that clear. And Michael's come in with one which I think has sort of been answered, but the idea that no changes will happen at the select committee, you have addressed that there will be some level of impact, no matter what that is in terms of submissions.
There absolutely will be. And Michael may well look at the final result and think, gosh, that's hopeless compared to what you would have wanted. But there will be changes. There nearly always is. So it is worth doing. And of course, you summed this up well, Brendan, at the start when you said this has been a 20-year wrestle. This is a moment in the ring, so to speak, but the wrestle will continue.
Yeah. Right. Last one from Scott is a new question. Is it worthwhile adding a supplementary submission if you feel you've missed important points initially and you can state so? I'll add more information later. Yes?
Yes, it is. My view is that the short answer is yes, as you can do additional submissions right up to the end point, right? And sometimes if you are speaking in person and if you bring supplementary information, the committee will decide to accept that as well. Most of the time, my experience over those 9 years is that we rarely said no, right? Because this is a democratic process. It's about someone saying, actually, I've got some more ideas on this that I think you'd be interested in. Of course, as long as you're not attacking an individual and there's no natural justice issues, almost certainly the MPs will take it.
All right, we've got a minute to go, Todd. There is a need for us to have courage to be heard in terms of the writing and actually presenting. And I really liked it. I think it was really important, the words you were saying, actually, from our own lived experience. You've mentioned that more than twice. Yeah. So it's all very well for an intellectual or piece, but to really just speak from our own experience and our businesses and lifestyle and whatever it is as part of a citizenship. Is there a question we haven't asked you that we should have?
No, not that jumps out to my mind. I mean, the key thing is that, look, there's 7:30 on a Tuesday morning, right? and you've got, I don't know, 30 or 40 people on this, maybe more, and you're on here because you have a huge interest and concern over this bill. You are engaged in a critical debate in New Zealand, and your voice must be heard, right? And so you grab that pen or pen if you're Brendan, laptop for the rest of us, and and bash out that submission, and speak from the heart, identify areas that you're concerned with. I've always felt it powerful if you say, there are elements here that I do support, and here's what they are, but here are my real concerns on these sections, because it gives the MP the impression that you're considered. You haven't taken a completely ideological view, either pro or against, full stop. You've looked at the legislation and identified areas which perhaps are okay, but areas that give you real concern. And then speak from the heart and back it up with your own experience. That's really powerful, particularly for those generalists in the room who can actually start seeing the implications of what's proposed.
Brilliant, Todd. Thank you so much for your time this morning, and thank you very much for everybody who's attended and the questions that have come in. Of course, they've all come in a bit late. There's a lot more there, Todd, but we'll finish it up there. Thank you so much, and thank you, Lou, for helping us and making this real today. Todd, you have a good day, and goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Can I just remind everyone that the OANZ website has a whole heap of resources to help you make submissions, from an activation toolkit to a submissions guide to editable Word documents that you can personalize with the key points. So please head on over to OANZ.org for that, and we'll share the links, and we'll record this video. We'll send it out. We've recorded it. We'll send it out in an email afterwards today. So thank you, everybody.
Brilliant, Lou.
See you next time.
Thanks, Todd. Bye now.
Brendan. Bye-bye.